From the hands of steel looking to get back to winning ways, to having tons of experience on his side, here's how Geoff Neal will destroy Ian Garry. He wants nothing more than to return to the top of the table and will do anything to get it done. Neal's one of the most exciting fighters at welterweight, always putting on a show for the fans.
Looked like maybe a clash of heads on the entry there. Oh, Geoff Neal with a knockdown!
That left hand is a...
Obviously, his boxing background helps him in doing that, and he isn't afraid to fight dirty in the pocket. Geoff fell short of Shavkat Rakhmonov in March 2023, after a tremendous battle where he pushed the Nomad to his absolute limits. Heading into UFC 285, Shavkat was the betting favorite for most people, but Neal proved once again why Dana White throws rising prospects against him.
I feel like I was either stronger or just as strong. My training partner's a beast. I trained with 185ers.
Hands of Steel completely shut out Rakhmonov's wrestling threat and made it into an absolute war of attrition on the feet. Geoff also tested Shavkat's chin in the octagon, and it was only after a hard-fought battle for almost 3 rounds that the Nomad was able to sink in a standing rear naked choke to finish the fight. It's the heart that Neal shows up with that impresses fans so much, and that's what makes him so dangerous as well, because you know he's going to take his opponents to their limits. Shavkat was pushed, but he endured and managed to come out on top, so now eyes will be on Ian to see if he can do the same and make a place for himself at the top of the table at a stacked welterweight division. The Irishman's young, so some fans are questioning the UFC's decision to throw him up against a seasoned fighter like Neal, because a loss could potentially spell doom for Garry. I mean, you guys have seen in the past when Dana pushed young guys way too fast and ended up destroying them altogether. Take Darren Till, for example. The man was hyped up too much too soon, and it ended up crashing and burning. Ian had time in his career to move up, and he could have been looking at a run toward the title in a couple of years.
I'm taking everybody out on the way, and I'm telling you now, in the next couple of years, I'm having a...
But the promotion's hoping that he can pick up a win against Neal now, so they can push him to the top shortly after. I do understand that they want another Irish superstar, given the success Conor McGregor's brought them, but it might be too soon for Ian to take an opponent like Neal. Don't get me wrong here, guys. It's not like Ian stands no chance. But the risk's far greater for him against a guy like Geoff, because the man's known to end careers. Remember Vincent Luke? He was supposed to be the next star in welterweight, but then he lost to Bilal Muhammad, and then Hands of Steel knocked him out, derailing Vincent's hype train completely. Neal also did something similar to Santiago Ponzinibbio back in 2021, and don't be surprised if he snaps Garry's unbeaten streak too. It'd be a real shame if that happens, but it's a genuine possibility. Even then, you could argue that Ian can go back to the drawing board and start all over again since he's still pretty young, but everyone deals with a loss differently. There's no telling how Garry would react to it. Maybe he'll improve and show a much better version of himself, or he might just crumble away, becoming an afterthought like so many promising fighters in the UFC. Even though Geoff should be heavily favored in this match, there are things that the young Irishman can do to nullify his boxing threat. Neal's always struggled against taller guys who can keep him at bay, like Stephen Thompson and Neil Magny, who could just use their kicks to maintain distance and stick their jabs into Geoff's face if he tried to get too close. Shavkat also used his range advantage well, and even though he isn't as big of a kicker as the rest of the guys I mentioned, you could see Neal in trouble a couple of times in their match. Ian has a similar fighting style, as he favors throwing kicks in abundance, which might become a problem for Neal the longer the fight goes on. There are things that Hands of Steel can do to counter that, but there's no denying that he has problems doing that, especially against lengthier opponents, and Ian has a whopping 4-inch height advantage over him, which could turn out to be a huge factor if Garry can execute his game plan well. Having said that, Geoff's been in similar spots a lot of times before, and he can dictate the fight however he wants to. The man knows how to make things work in his favor, and he's no stranger to fighting guys taller than him. Plus, Neal has the ability to close the distance very quickly in a fight, and he just pulls his opponents into a brawl, which is pretty much the bread and butter for him in the octagon. I mean, you probably expected Rakhmonov to secure a lot of takedowns during UFC 285, and given the physical advantages that the Nomad had, it wouldn't even be a long shot. But Neal defended really well against that, and then turned the match into a bar fight. It's so hard not to get sucked into it when a fight turns into a brawl, and this is where boxers find the most success as well. They can trade in the pocket with their ability. as they can avoid getting hit themselves and land their own counters in the meantime. Geoff's one of the best boxers on the UFC roster, and he can really make Ian work for it if the two men start trading in the pocket. It's not that Garry can't hold his own, but he doesn't have the same power or the chin, which would make it next to impossible for the Irishman to knock out Neal. If the fight was to end in a finish, then chances are that Hands of Steel would be the one sealing the deal, because even though Ian has some knockout wins in his career, he just doesn't have the power to put Geoff's lights out. The man's never been knocked out in his UFC career, while securing 4 KO wins himself. But Ian's shown that he's got a weak chin. You could see how he was almost out during his fight against Song Keenan in the very first round, but he somehow managed to rally back and secure a win in the third. Song wasn't even a ranked guy in the UFC, so you can guess how things might get even messier for him against Neal. Because if he catches the young Irishman, then you can bet that he won't let up and will go in for the kill. Even if somehow Garry's able to survive getting knocked out cold, he can't really keep up with Geoff's pace. Boxing's one thing, but trading blow for 3 straight rounds is another ballgame. Ian may have all the stamina in the world, but that doesn't necessarily translate into keeping up with Neal's brawl-heavy style. Y'all saw what Hands of Steel did against Shavkat, how he was able to maintain that same output for almost 3 rounds. The question is whether Ian can do the same, because Rakhmonov's a monster, so he was able to match Geoff there in the pocket. But the young Irishman doesn't have the chin for it, and he might just end up getting hurt. He may even get gassed out after a couple of rounds, while Neal could just do that all day long. Plus, when push comes to shove, Ian starts throwing everything at his opponents, which might work against inexperienced guys. But Geoff could see his strikes coming in from a mile away, and he can counter them pretty effectively because he's far too experienced, facing some of the best guys at welterweight. Ian's a rising star, there's no doubt about that, but he doesn't have the same kind of experience in the octagon as Hands of Steel. Garry's only had 5 fights under the UFC's banner till now, and that too against unranked opponents. Geoff will be the first real challenge that he faces in the promotion, and as I said, he might just not be ready for it right now. Neal has been fighting for a long time now, and even a title contender like Bilal lost to this guy in the past, so you can imagine the level he's at. Geoff even knocked out an elite boxer like Mike Perry back in 2019, which shows how dangerous and experienced he is. Neal's resume is nothing to scoff at, and if the young Irishman doesn't respect it, then he might just be in a world of trouble. It's a fight at the end of the day, but it would be foolish to bet against Geoff. So there you have it, fight fans. From having tons of experience on his side to the Hands of Steel looking to get back to winning ways, that's how Geoff Neal will destroy Ian Garry.